O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. B.W. Johnson paints this picture of ancient Athens. He says, imagine Paul stands in the midst of Mars Hill in the Areopagus. Keep in mind that this address was spoken in the literary capital of the ancient world, the most cultured city of the earth, to which every Roman who sought a finished education resorted to complete his studies. Picture it. It's the home of philosophers and orators, sculptors, painters, and poets, and a great university where many thousands of strangers were gathered for study. Yes, this ancient city has a glorious history. It's the modern capital of ancient Greece and has about 100,000 inhabitants. When I read this, friends, and I saw that Acts 17, Paul's speech on Mars Hill, was one of the suggested stewardship texts for this season, I didn't balk like many of my colleagues are doing in this season, but I thought, oh no, we could use this passage. We could use this passage to reframe our lives. Why? Well, because it's not too hard for us to see our lives in this text. Now, we may not live in the place where all of the people who want an education, who want to finish education, come to, but we do live in a great university town. A university town filled with thousands of strangers who are gathered for study. And we too live in a city that's full of philosophers and orators and painters and poets. All these people gathered. We too find ourselves in a city full of seekers and searchers, people who ask questions and who yearn for meaning making in this life. Like the ancient people that we read about today, we live in a place where people are perpetually probing their consciousness for answers. Besides the dozens upon dozens of houses of worship in these cities in which we live, there's a never-ending schedule of lectures and panels and book groups and discussion circles and opportunities for meditation and yoga classes and all forms of seeking and searching. All those things happen in this place in which we live on any given day. And if none of that works for you, in your seeking and searching, well, you could walk into any coffee shop on any street corner in Champaign and step into a conversation about the meaning of life and our role in it. You could do that so easily on any day. Friends, I think that we would feel right at home in ancient Athens. And Paul would feel right home in Champaign too. And so the question that we wrestle with today is, what does Paul have to say about our stewardship theme? What does he bring to this world in which he finds himself? And then what do we bring to this world in which we find ourselves? What does Paul bring? First, let's talk about that in terms of time. Paul brings himself. He shows up. Now, if you've never read the book of Acts, I would suggest that you do. It reads like an action novel, honestly. Paul's on the lam, folks. He's been beaten, he's been imprisoned, he's survived an earthquake of supernatural origin, and he's escaped from prison. And he shows up in Athens where he can just blend in with all of those tens of thousands of seekers and searchers. So we too show up in Champaign on our journey. Now, our journey to get here may not be as exciting as Paul's, may not be as dramatic. I don't know that any of you are on the lam. You might be, I don't know. But here we are nonetheless. Paul spends his time walking through the city, noticing what's going on, and he shows up and participates in conversations, in debates. It's how he uses his time. Friends, how are you showing up? Where are you showing up? What do you bring in terms of time? What does Paul bring? What does he bring in terms of talent? Well, Paul's talent is he's a communicator. In fact, most commentators say Paul can't really shut up. Paul's a talker. He talks all the time. That's the talent that he brings, and he's good at it. He's able to go toe to toe with these philosophers and orators in ancient Athens. He discusses and debates and delivers speech upon speech. In fact, we would be right to compare Paul's ability to argue his point with that of Socrates, or for those of you who are fans of Bill and Ted, Socrates. Sorry, I just had to say it. The author of Acts uses the Greek verb dialegato to describe Paul's reasoning, his arguing skills. And that's the verb that is most often used to describe Socrates' dialectic arguments. It's Paul's talent. He can communicate, he can talk, he can argue a point, and he can frame it in a way that his audience hears it. They're able to take in what he says. Friends, what talent do you use? What talents do you employ? What do you bring? Lastly, we ask, what does Paul bring in terms of treasure? Well, to figure this out, we have to go back to what he communicates about God. That is, that Paul is able to take all of the Athenians' seeking and searching and unknown naming and reframe it. He says, in all their seeking and searching and unknown naming, that God has been with them all along. We read in verses 23, 24, and 25, I'm not here to tell you about some strange foreign deity, but about this one whom you already worship. You already worship God and you didn't even know it. This is the God who made the universe and all it contains. It's the God who is the ruler of all heaven and earth. And it's the one who gives humans everything they need. All the treasures come from God: life, breath, food, shelter, and so on. Paul sums it all up by saying, it is in God in whom we live and move and have our being. That's what Paul brings in terms of treasure. He brings it all. He brings it all. It all comes from God. It all belongs to God. In the end, it all goes back to God. So friends, what do you bring in terms of treasure? I'm glad to report to you that you are a congregation that brings so much in terms of treasure. We have a very high percentage of people who pledge, both members and non-members of our church, folks who make a committed gift so that the ministries of this church can continue. Because I will tell you, just as we look at ancient Athens and we see these altars to unknown gods, we can look around our community and see altars all over the place. This building, with its coexist flags and rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter flags and peace and justice flags and declaration of being a united church of Christ, this too is an altar to a God who is known and who knows us, in whom we live and move and have our being. Yes, friends, I'm glad to report to you that you give so much. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but there are pie charts in your stewardship package for this year. If you want to know how much we actually give, take a look at it. This gigantic blue section, 53% of our annual income, those are from pledges. And then this section here, identified unpledged giving, and this section here, open plate, those also represent the treasures that you give in the ministry of this church to make the world a more whole and healthy place. But perhaps we should talk a little more about the treasures and what we give. There are lots of opinions about how you do this. Some of my colleagues and I had a long conversation about it this week. One pastor remarked that stewardship experts, some of them are encouraging churches that have not had successful stewardship campaigns to move away from those entirely, to frame giving in a different way. Other folks said, no, the best thing to do is to, if you want to raise funds, is to simply ask people to give funds. Don't have a spaghetti dinner in order to have people give money. Just have them give the money. I noticed this week that Elizabeth Dilley, who is on the national staff, who's been here and preached for you all, Elizabeth told this story. She said, honest to God, we had this former moderator at the church she attends in Cleveland who got up a few years ago and gave the most depressing pitch about stewardship. She said, it was straightforward, But it was so damn gloomy, she said. Oh, as a national staff person who had just done all of this denominational work on stewardship, she wanted to crawl in a hole and die. It's really how she felt about it. But then she remarked that it worked. It worked. She said giving increased by double digits that year, and it continued to increase significantly each year, and she was simultaneously appalled and thrilled all at the same time. I kind of have that feeling about stewardship because I'm the person who's always said, the way that we raise money for the ministry of the church is to not tell people how much the bills cost, but to remind them of the mission and the ministry of the church, to help people see the dream and what is possible, to inspire people. And then people say, I want to be part of that, and they give. Well, you had that last week when Joel came down out of the pulpit and stood right here and had his come to Jesus moment with you about the mission and the ministry of the church and what's possible, what is life-saving about the ministry of this place that stands on this street corner as an altar to a known God. I'm going to do the opposite of that today. I'm going to talk to you about the bills for a second. We are a generous people. So this is in no way a you should or if you would only or a shaming. Don't hear it as that, because we are a generous congregation. But friends, the fact of the matter is that this year, the Church Life Board decided to supplement some of our budget with some of our reserve funds so that we would go into this year with a $17 surplus. We're not a church with a giant endowment. And that is, in one way, a curse, because we don't have endless amounts of money to be able to rest on. But in another way, it's a blessing, because we will never be a church that's beholden to the endowment. And churches that do that, they're dying left and right. No, we are a vibrant and alive place. And I'll just tell you that it's important for our congregation to increase our giving if it's possible for us to do that. If not, our board will have to make choices about programming and about staffing that will have to go away, because that's the reality of our current situation. You need to remember that we live in a place that's constantly changing. We're a church that has high numbers of growth in terms of membership, but we're also a church that has high numbers of turnover because we live in a place where people come and go. It's important for us to remember that so that we frame this invitation to give in a way that's set firmly in reality. We live in a place like ancient Athens, where people are constantly searching and seeking and trying to make meaning in this life. But friends, we're the arc benders, and together as a community, we help bend the arc of the universe more and more towards God's greater justice and mercy. May God bless whatever it is that we have to give. Bless it and multiply it, and may it be used for God's glory. May it be so. Amen.